We are here with Dustin Pickering, Editor-in-Chief of Transcendent Zero Press, as well as the quarterly journal Harbinger Asylum. He is holding in his hand the latest release from TZ Press, called the Selfhood Anthology, or Selfhood, Varieties of Experience. Dustin, tell me a little bit about the origins of this unique concept, as well as the person you've been working closely with.
The other editor, Kirti Sengupta in India, asked me, he said he wanted to work on a project with me, editing an anthology. He said, do you have a theme in mind? And for whatever reason, the idea of selfhood came to mind. And so I said, why don't we do one on selfhood? Because I'm thinking, the Indian varieties of identity questions and stuff are different from the ones here in America and in the Western world. And so the idea essentially was to explore the sort of Eastern conceptions and the Western conceptions, how they affect the the thinking and the relationships of the people who believe those things, the attitudes, sort of how these ideas, what they have in common, how they can be met, how they can come together, and in what ways are they different. We have a afterword written by, I believe she's a kind of a fresh voice. She's starting a literary journal in India. Her name is Dolan Champa Chakraborty. And she wrote the afterword, and in the afterword she does go into some pretty good detail about her studies in Hindu and Buddhist spirituality as well as Western individualism. And you see there's a different a lot of different approaches throughout the different work in the book. So that was pretty much the goal. And this is the actual book. This isn't the, this is our proof copy. We've added to it a little bit and put it together, proofed it a little bit, and it should be available. I'm gonna have to approve it probably tomorrow to have it put up on CreateSpace, and then it'll be on Amazon within the next 2 or 3 days probably.
I see. So, yeah, and one of my favorite parts is the mandala on the cover, if you people at home can see it. Let me just zoom in a little bit. So this one, it's this sky blue, flower-shaped mandala, and almost like a blue flaming sun, almost, and in the middle, either an eye or whatnot. And yeah, expanding on what you were saying as far as differences between similarities and differences between Eastern and Western thinking, I think it's important that that we bring as many Eastern ways of thinking into the Western world as much as possible. I think a lot of us need to really delve deep into it. And over the years, I myself have been sort of switching back and forth. I'm not 100% Eastern, of course, but I wasn't as Western as I used to be when I was a wee lad. And I myself have been reading the I Ching, and not even halfway done, and already I've been quite enlightened. It's to sound cliche, but it is a spiritual awakening indeed. I've been reading about this book for years, and I've been diving into the Eastern poetry more and more, and it's much more universal. I love it so much. And now, could you expand a little bit on the theme of selfhood? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Basically, a self is the fundamental core person you are. And in some respects it can mean, like in Western thinking, it basically comes down to individual self. I am this or I am that. You read like Descartes, and I think therefore I am. That's the kind of Western conception. Eastern conception is a little more relational. It's more like I'm a part of this broader picture, and there some some I think Buddhism sees the self as sort of not existing, and Hinduism sees the self as like Atman. It's the spark that is connected to the divine being, that yourself is relating to the full universal force. And so they see each other, I guess you could say. I mean, part of what these questions encourage is certain types of relating to other people. And I'm guessing, to some degree, I feel that those kinds of beliefs develop the way society perceives, the way society, people interact with each other, the way society is framed to a certain degree, where you see, different approaches to relating to others based on your own conception of self. Whether or not it may even be argued that that individual self, the identity of the I am, may be in some ways part of the development of the Western world with private property and individual rights. And of course we've got the identity politics. A lot of poetry these days goes into that, and things like that. And like I said, like in Japanese and other cultures, the self is more relational. It's not so autonomous, and that's part of the thing we want to explore in this anthology is in what ways can these two different ideas, or these different approaches, benefit from learning more about the other.
Definitely. Now, well, let me ask you, have you ever read the I Ching before?
No.
Do you have any desire to read it?
I've never really thought about it. I have, in fact, read a lot of the Eastern mysticism, especially the Indian mysticism, the Upanishads,
Speaking of Siva.
The what?
Speaking of Siva, it's one of the older Indian books as well.
I've heard of that one. I've gone into the
Dhammapada.
I have the Dhammapada. I have read. That's the Buddhist.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's the Rig Vedas, which I haven't read that, but I've read some. I've read the Bhagavad Gita, which is very interesting. But these different approaches, from what I know, some of the Eastern thinking, I mean, the Western world is kind of inoculated. It's in some ways, it's not very, it hadn't been very open to these foreign influences for a long time. And then it came down to, we were seeing the breakdown of, I guess you could say, the individualism and all that we have been, kind of relying on for all this time. We're seeing it sort of breaking down, and so these other ideas are starting to kind of merge with our own, and we're seeing some more communication between these two different approaches. And that's been in recent years. They've had old conferences and stuff where they have all kinds of thinkers and whatever else come together and talk about these different approaches, and just trying to have these forums where what can we learn from each other, and ultimately that kind of discussion would probably be best and improve both sides. I mean, because obviously with the West, our version of capitalism has spread all over the world, and our and here in America, our Constitution has been hugely influential all over the world, and in some ways, the Eastern thinking has kind of made us a little more aware of the fact that we're part of the whole. Each individual person is an atom, and within a molecule, and all those atoms are equally viable and a lot of people will probably be reluctant to really think in those terms. I mean, but it's very interesting, trying to explore in this book, where these ideas come from, why they're important, and why should we even think about the question of identity or the question of selfhood. And we're presenting several different varieties of experiences, which is what it's called, Selfhood, Varieties of Experience.
Of course.
I kind of think that your own, your own view of yourself and your own person, who you are in general, is part of how you experience the world.
Definitely.
Your perception of yourself and your relationship with what's out there in the concrete external world, or in many ways it's very, very similar types of things. So it's something that I think anybody who picks up this book and kind of thinks about it and really reads the poems, they're going to see different people approaching the same question different ways. And there's one poem there's one piece called "The Years of Living Crazily," and the writer Alan Catlin talks about his mother and how she was extremely crazy, and how this has affected him as a person. So you see there this person and phone. The end.
Well, before we conclude this interview, Dustin, would you please do us the honor of reading the poem in there that speaks out to you? The one that just speaks to you the most. I'm sorry, I couldn't concentrate with the thing.
In here?
Yes.
I'll pick something. I'm going to read a part of a poem from a woman who I met some time ago, and I really liked her poem. It's very long. It took several pages, but I'm going to find this here, and she's I don't know how much she's published, but from what I'm kind of gathering, she's a Columbia grad, and
who is she?
her name is Sasha.
Oh, okay.
Her name is this is called "Conversation with a Dream," and she opens each section of this poem with a quote, and it's a self-created quote. I'm gonna read the first section.
Okay.
And it opens with the quote, "Allow me to love you with a longing most foolish. The heart knows what it knows. All words, cobwebs pretending in sunlight to be silver. This cannot be helped. So sadly, I have the burden to say, brother, how long did we glory through rough Arabian nights? Your temper, in my defense, an old debt to pay. Wish I could wish to show you Allah as I promised, but in this life I have lost my wisdom finally, and can only point to your own image." And that's Sasha Pamasad. And this poem is, it's very beautiful, and she's very perceptive in her whole, I guess, the writing itself. It's just, it's very beautiful. She sent me this poem. I was like, wow. But there's quite a bit of material in here that will strike you as very thoughtful. I mean, if you really like thoughtful poetry that will set your mind, into a good query, I guess you could say. This is a good book. This is going to be $8, and basically, there's all kinds of poets in here from all over the world, and we have different people of different backgrounds, people of different approaches to this question, and I think anybody can get something out of this and enjoy the writing for its own sake, and think on, the questions proposed here. So
Splendid. So you heard it from the master himself, Dustin Pickering, holding Selfhood, Varieties of Experience, edited by Mr. Pickering and Kiriti Sengupta, on sale for $8. Thank you very much. Poetry lives,